Hello, this is Robert Casey, and this is a presentation on the trade-offs between privacy and accessibility. There are many forms of privacy, and this presentation is going to be primarily on genetic genealogy, but I felt like I needed to give a very high-level perspective. First of all, there's your financial information, such as your credit card information, access to your critical finance accounts, such as brokerage accounts. This is where uh, the, the biggest threat to your economic security is, because Experian has been very lax and 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 disclosed over several million people. TJ Maxx exposed hundreds of thousands and millions of credit card pins and credit card numbers. This is where we need some firmer regulation to really to give more corporate ownership to these kind of things. Then there's medical information, and this has really been addressed with GINA laws. They basically say an insurance company, if you're caught discriminating for medical conditions, you can be given several $100 million fines to several $1 billion fines. However, the corporate world is lobbying to change the GINA rules to discriminate for new employees for corporations, and this may actually pass. Identity information is another thing, but these are common sense things like need to use a shredder, don't carry your social security card in your purse. Some of the obvious things that don't respond to those emails that are obviously trying to spam you for your identification, that kind of stuff. Then there's genetic profiling. And this is where there is an exposure because law enforcement uses genetic profiling to track down uh, and convict criminals. First of all, around 99% of all DNA used by law enforcement is for their own database, which is basically from criminal elements. And this only covers about 15% or 20% of the population. But it's a growing trend to start using genetic genealogy databases. But this can only be used by subpoena. But this kind of stuff is growing. So if you're concerned about this kind of privacy, you really shouldn't test. But this isn't really going to make much difference because your cousins will test anyways, and your information will be added to these databases. There's a lot of concern about personal information, and family tree does require some personal names. They require the name of donor so they can legally obtain the DNA. They have an address of the person who owns the account, a phone number, an email, and even the surname of the oldest proven ancestor is personal information of sorts. The addresses, phone numbers, and emails are available from all kinds of sources, so this is a minimal exposure to privacy. However, the name of the donor and also the name of the oldest proven ancestor is key for law enforcement usage. Unfortunately, the privacy laws are extremely broad and are dragging in the genetic genealogy community. And this really distracts from serious issues that directly finance your security issue. Genetic genealogy is negatively effective by these broad laws, but law enforcement issues is a serious threat to admins and family tree DNA. But giving law enforcement the power to track down serious criminals is good. Again, the misuse of personal information in genetic genealogy is really pretty minimal. However, companies like Google and Facebook and other tech giants, they really need some serious regulation because uh, they are really filtering out information and also selling your experience on the internet to fine-tune advertising and making huge amounts of money off of this. But controlling their bad behavior should not be done through regulations, uh, but it should be done through broad privacy laws. It should be very targeted legislation aimed at abuse of large uh, collections of information. Genial law is the right approach. It basically targets, the insurance industry for not using DNA to to reject customers because they're going to be higher cost. However, 23 announced recently that they are selling their Y-DNA database to a very large drug company. Uh, and this is a serious issue. This is just one step away from the data accidentally falling to the wrong hands. But this also has some key advantages because there are going to be some serious advances in the medical research. So we want this to happen. But there needs to be some security regulations, for hacking and misuse and protection of your data, which doesn't exist today. Both autosomal DNA and Y-DNA provide serious inroads to be able to identify living people. After all, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect our ancestors, but indirectly able to collect closer and closer relatives as well. Now, MTDA only has 16,000 base pairs, and it's unlikely to yield much information by law enforcement, but it could be used in special exceptions. Y-DNA only covers half the population, so autosomal will be the primary tool for law enforcement. This test will be used by law enforcement. That's because the number of testers is much higher. It has well over 10 times as many producers, and it's also more in the recent time frame. And also it does not eliminate half the population because females can't be tracked with Y-DNA. It covers all lines in your pedigree chart versus just one. And also there's many companies that have extensive databases as well, and this list will continue to grow over time. However, since autosomal testing covers all your lines, this requires law enforcement to evaluate many testers to determine which line it is. It'll probably only be used for various serious crimes which have not been solved. But even this time, it's much more economical to go with autosomal because once you run out all the leads, the clues can lead to extremely high cost to law enforcement to make any more progress. However, Y-DNA is going to be more useful over the long haul. It's just now beginning to find connections in the genealogical time frame in the last 1,000 years. But it's just one test, and it directly will tie you down potentially to people on pedigree charts. Y-DNA is creating a descendant chart of mankind, and it's recently getting down to known genealogy and small numbers these days. The remainder of this presentation will be about the family tree DNA rollout of privacy. And this is where we have the biggest concerns. The remainder, and so here's a huge trade-off between privacy and accessibility. People seem to think that I want to have some privacy, don't realize that this causes a loss of accessibility and drives up testing costs overall. This is only going to concentrate on Y-DNA in the rest of the presentations, but most of this is applicable to autosomal testing as well. Privacy just results in overall cost because if you lose a third or half of all your testers, that means you're going to have to test a third or half more. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of testing results being discarded or not known. So here's kind of a history about how it's being rolled out, the family tree DNA. Around 3 years ago, when the Alaskan lawsuit was in the final stages, Family Tree changed its open policy and defaulted all new project testers to private within groups, or in projects, I should say. So this default was done without any consent or any interaction with the user who was taking the test. You just default to private. Approximately 1/3 of the testers are still in this condition over the last 3 years. Again, this just drives up costs because most of these testers are now known to anybody in projects. But family tree DNA does have a serious legal exposure. They will continue to reduce access to reduce their legal exposure. However, you just cannot make everyone non-accessible overnight because that would lose 1/3 of the testers, and that would create a big whirlwind. So Family Tree A is choosing an incremental reduction of access, which is not really forthright to customers. And thanks to the EU GDPR laws, we're now in hyper gear on privacy because these laws are very broad, and Family Tree has chose to introduce major rules that would expose the admins to legal exposure. When a person leaves a project, all their data must be purged. If it is not purged and used, the admin is subject to lawsuit and to the jurisdiction of European Union GDPR law, even though it's not a law in the United States. It is now a contractual part of the admin contract. So they have chosen to extend this European law to all admins in all over the world. So this is a contractual thing. Uh, if a project manager updates their privacy setting to private while project manager, they must be removed as well. So admins, if you make these two changes, basically your data is going to be purged by all admins because they know that if they continue to use your data in any form at all, that they're going to be very legally liable. This shows the real ugly side of Family Tree rollout. They decided to basically make all new project members, quote, minimal, uh, which was originally labeled as no access. This really results to get the STR results with minimal, you have to hand transcribe because they removed the copy and paste capability and you can't download. Uh, and so this was just going to shut off all new testers from joining projects. So basically, this made all new members' data not accessible to even admins. So there was huge pressure from the admins, and Family has been changing the default back to limited, but there's a lot of artifacts of this decision left, which are still have negative impact. This presentation is on September 1st because September 1st is the deadline to sign the onerous admin contract. This will result in hundreds of key admins no longer having access to their data and no longer having any kind of control of their projects since they can't log on anymore. Many projects will be closed because if they have no admins, they're going to be closed. There are some significant surname projects that will have issues. It's unclear how Family Tree is going to take a project with 500 testers under one surname and just close them down. Admins are now liable legally just as much as Family Tree. So if Family Tree chooses, they can legally drag in all the admins affected by the lawsuit. So if your member of your project decides to sue, you will be brought into a legal battle, and you have no right to any jury by trial. It's done by arbitration, and corporate arbitration always favors the corporate people versus the people who are not following the corporate uh, genre. So putting admins at risk is just really a shameful act for Family Tree to take their volunteer workforce who have driven their revenue for years and then make them legally liable for their own behavior. Family Tree has a incremental rollout of this privacy. They will surely reduce accessibility to get their legal exposure reduced. There's been at least a dozen changes in the last 4 months of less and less liability. Quote interpretations, slightly new changes in the way the screens work, etc. Uh, this rollout shows that Fabric is really intentionally misleading their customer base. For instance, they use the edit capability, which most admins don't want, and then they say, you don't want this level of access because you can allow editing. Well, it also reduces access, which is the uh, act that they're trying to carry out. They need to separate the edit capability and make it an own field, but they've chosen to tie editing and reduced access together, which is not the right thing to do. There's a lot of misdirection of information going on in privacy these days. If you look at the privacy reviews, most of these are done by non-family tree employees, but they receive significant incomes as subcontractors. These are pretty biased views in some cases. Other cases they're less biased, but in many cases they're very biased. So uh, we need to put to these people that if you are receiving a large amount of money from family, you should disclose it. And they're logging on and saying they're a volunteer admin when they're basically working full time as a subcontractor to Family Tree NA. Minimal access implies that you have some access, but there's no longer a copy and paste. So I guess Family Tree wants us to hand transcribe 111 markers. This is not access, and this is really very misleading in their documentation. There is no doubt that there's going to be more reduction of accessibility. It's happening daily, even today. And so we need to be concerned about this because the more we lose access, the more people have to test. And since Family Tree is making, 50 million a year, and if we lose 1/3, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of lost information. This only dries up overall costs. So if you currently have DNA opt-in disabled, then you're the target, and you will be removed incrementally and no longer be able to receive free admin analysis because this analysis has to be done through spreadsheets and charts, PDF files, and there are no file upload capabilities inside of Family Tree websites. So basically, in the future, you're at risk from being removed. Hopefully, this will be somewhat incrementally, though. I'm not sure what Family Tree is considering, but they're crippling accessibility for new admins. So as older admins leave, retire, die, future admins will have such little access they won't be able to carry out their work. I'm not sure. This is a real open switch that has been not very exposed because of so many new project joins being at minimal. So, they have put so many new limitations for accessibility in that it's hard to continue to get Family Tree to change so many things. Admins have to require, these new admins have to require every new project manager manually to send an email to grant them access. Is this the kind of access that you want to have in the future? Because 10 or 15 years from now, 3/4 of these admins are going to be gone. And guess what? All the new admins won't have any kind of accessibility and won't be able to provide and just going to drive costs to the roof because how can you analyze without looking at your data? Fortunately, there's only 3 key settings that members of projects need to really update. The first and most important one is DNA opt-in to sharing. And if it's disabled, this is the most important because these people are going to be phased out over time in some form or fashion. And so this represents around anywhere from 25 to 50% of projects because so many people have defaulted for the new testers in the last 3 years to this default value. And another 5 or 10% have changed to privacy thinking that sounds like a good thing. The second one, which is a lot more trickier rollout, is project preferences. It was set minimal for each new admin, which is slowly phasing out access to admins over time. So this is a really serious issue. And so what we recommend is taking project preferences and put it to advanced, which is what we had before May 25th. And also, it allows several things, like you can't use project funds without involving Family Tree manually to place orders for you. This is just silly. And also, you can't even make a list of the people, the countries that your testers are from anymore because all that data is being hidden now. Also, admins can't even see the exposure or what countries these people are from and see if they're exposed to EU regulations directly from the European Union. Uh, DNA matching level is another minor one, but they have uh, rolled out restrictions, and at least 80–90% of the matching is no longer there. And this is really bad because some people throw out the 37 marker level because they don't want to get spam mails. And that setting was used for another new setting to say, oh, you're not going to be able to see any 37 markers. This means we can't recruit 37 markers because it's disabled. So these are the three key ones that you need to concentrate on to get you and everybody in your genetic cluster to update to. To give Family Tree a break, they have legal exposures. The Alaskan privacy law was so broad and so interpreted, uh, and then also they made a decision to embrace EU GDPR rules, and this is uh, very broad because this no longer uh, is a minor law. This has a lot of detail in it. It has European bureaucrats been working years on this, and the Alaskan law was so vague that it's been uh, you know challenged so many times that I think the Alaska court system is getting tired of this law. Family Tree are allowing their attorneys to drag their volunteer admins into their lawsuits. This is really sets a precedent that a lot of people just aren't going along with. September 1st, the deadline, and we're going to lose 10 to 20% of all admins. Now, usually uh, it's a secondary or a third admin, but that's a lot less people, helping you out today because of this law. The day that this happens, where they drag somebody in, you're going to see thousands of key admin people immediately stop being admins. This could be a fatal blow to Family Tree's economic cash flow and a fatal blow to our hobby. Here's some positive steps that Family Tree can take. First of all, they really need to address the phase out of new admins by receiving low access and change their default from minimal. This is just really it's going to create a significant problem in the future. Plus, they create a new field to create edit capabilities and unbundle editing with access. Also, they should take new testers and take them through a dialogue to make an informed decision versus just defaulting. They have claimed they're going to do this and roll out new screens, and it just isn't happening according to what they promised to the community. Also, they're creating so many multiple levels of privacy. It's confusing even for the most seasoned person of how to interpret all these privacy switches. They need to remove some of these new forms of privacy. When a person leaves the project, they're supposed to be removed and purged from all project data, regardless of their DNA opt-in to sharing setting. This is a new form of privacy, and this is going to be strictly enforced because they're going to send an email saying you need to purge this person from all your data. If you're not, you're subject to lawsuit. That's the emails they send out. They don't say subject to lawsuit. They say you're violating admin guidelines, obviously. They need to figure out a way where project funds can be used without manual involvement of Family Tree. And you don't have to have advanced capability. This is silly for advanced haplogroup project because we've done probably 100 tests in the last two years where we've sponsored or partially sponsored testers, and this has been a real positive carrot to get people to test. Yet you have to be advanced to make this work. Or you have to call in to Family Tree and ask them to place the test. And the help desk just is not real advanced in these areas. Also, they need to, if they're going to call this accessible, they need to remove the copy and paste restrictions. If you're going to call something accessible and you're expecting admins and researchers of your own matches to hand transcribe 111 markers, this is really, another form of privacy. Copy and paste being removed is yet another form of privacy that is hidden to most people. People just don't understand the major impact of privacy is on the economics of this hobby. Privacy may sound good, but currently 1/3 of the testers, if you use 1/3 of the testers and they've done approximately over $100 million of the business, if not 200 or 300 million, we're talking about $100 million of testing just not being used. YDNA is an exercise in statistics. The sample size increases accuracy and better analysis. And people think that they can keep theirs private and it won't make any difference. But believe me, over time, as Family Tree rolls out all these levels of privacy, it's going to cost us more money to get the same information. Also, testers and project members need to get more engaged. Admins are there to assist you. Now, you should give your admin, just free carte blanche. You should get familiar with them, read the forum, the activity logs, and get comfortable with their skills and their desire to help you. Haplogroups admins are in a special class because they are concentrating on one particular geographic line, and usually it's a very specialized into one haplogroup. And the surname projects just can't become experts on every major haplogroup. It's just too much to ask them to do, but just classify you into different major haplogroup types. Also, they need to understand that privacy comes at a steep price tag. So please update your 3 key privacy settings, because that's all it really takes for right now. It'll probably take more over time, but these are the really key settings that you need to voluntarily do and recruit your matches to do as well. Even with this huge drag in privacy, we're making tremendous progress. This is very exciting times for YDNA testing. Large surname clusters are now becoming more and more common. We're being able to chart exactly how people are related to each other with a certain degree of accuracy. Charting actually allows to see how people are connected together. Also, the skill level of these admins who've been doing this analysis for many years now, it's getting very impressive for free analysis. This privacy issue just reminds me of traditional geology research issues. The one that reminds me the most is people who want you to send all their information first, but then when you send it, they never send files back to you. That's the same thing with privacy. You expect that you can set your privacy and then you have access to everybody else's information. But over time, guess what? Family Tree is going to, all the people who choose that route, you're going to end up out in the cold because admins won't be able to analyze your data anymore. And under a lot of circumstances, now unless we get longer, they will be required to purge your data from all analysis. So this is a big trade-off. I used to have the same problem on privacy on my websites. My parents and I have been doing family histories for 40 years, and we published 9 600-page books. And I put them all up on the web, and I would routinely just get email after email, please remove me, because it's new. Well, unfortunately, I started with basically MagCard 2s a long time ago, and up to, but I never had a database program driving it. It's all word processing and desktop publishing. So when I told them that I can remove them, but if you remove them, I'm not gonna keep 2 copies. I just can't do that. 90% of them, I think I have about 100. I only have about 8 or 9 that actually wanted not to be dropped anymore because all of a sudden privacy meant that they're not going to be in the book, and that just trumped the privacy concerns. There are at least a dozen ways to where your data will be purged. The 2 big ones, which are contractually obligated for all managers and force. If you leave a project, your data is going to be purged. So if you are leaving the project because you're not related to the haplogroup, that's probably fine. But if you're a member of that project and you leave, basically you're going to be deleted, and the knowledge of your DNA test will be lost forever. Also, if you change your privacy now while a member of a project, you have to be purged as well. Now, so far there's been almost nobody doing that, but obviously that's a serious thing. So be careful if you change your privacy today, because you will have to be purged from all the projects. And all the projects you belong to, that means you're on your own because there's no more advice for you from any project admins. Also, admins can turn off YSTR and YSNIP reports. So that's another form of privacy that's at the control of admins. And Privacy did not, make this available for reasons that were given admins. They wanted to reduce accessibility and their exposure to lawsuits, and also to reduce their IT costs, because the fewer reports you have to generate, the less IT load you have. Many of these reports are no longer copy and pasteable. So your data is really, even though it says accessible, if it's no longer copy and pasted, huge amounts of these screens are no longer copy and pasteable. That's another form of privacy, just implementing copy and paste restrictions. Also, project access through project preferences has 3 levels. I mean, it has 3 levels of privacy, and it also can be implemented by each admin for each project. That's just a lot of ways that people will think, well, I don't need to give the third admin access, or I don't need to give these smaller projects access. Well, you're just, why join those projects? You might as well just leave them, because if you don't give them access, they can't do anything for you. Admins have actually been given the ability to change the rules for access for project rules. So our project, the L226 project, says if you're private and opt-in, we'll still publish your data. And so it's unclear if this is really a violation, but at one time, the admins had the right to develop their own rules as long as they're consistent. But they still can't violate the Family Tree Day guidelines, such as people leaving the project or turn on their settings. Also, the order button is no longer accepted for limited and minimal. So this results to no access to project funds unless you manually send emails or call Family Helpline. This is just silly. This makes the automated ways that we have traditionally used project funds, it requires advanced settings, which, we really don't want that for everything, but, we can no longer use project funds. So this is another privacy issue. It's, which gives less accessibility to order products on your behalf and then partially pay for them with admin funds. Admins can no longer track the countries where their testers come from. So somebody the other day asked me, well, how many people from Ireland in your Irish project? I can't tell, because now I have 50 to 100 members, where at limited, they don't show up anymore. So all those new people that are joining, we can no longer figure out even what country they're from. And also, since we can't figure out what country they're from, admins don't know the legal exposure of these people, because we don't know who is a person from the countries who fall directly into EU laws and are bound by GDPR from a legal point of view. So what's the conclusions you can take away from this? First of all, support your admin's ability to analyze your DNA by updating the three key privacy. Also, take some responsibility as a project manager and a tester. You need to encourage others in your genetic tester to follow your example versus expecting admins to continuously take on these chores. Uh, Also, you need to lobby your surname admins to favor accessibility or privacy to lower costs by making these SDR and YSNIP reports public because hoarding this information reminds me of taking the family Bible and somebody who doesn't want to share that family Bible with you because it's their key information and they like being in control of that. This just drives up costs. People need to understand that we're talking about $100 million extra in costs to make up for these privacy laws as they stand today. And this could go to 50%, so it could go to $200 million lost loss of testing. That's a lot of money for the desire to be private.